words, this can't go into Bridgewater, Bristol, Groton, or Hebron during the study, saying, hey, us too. Are we talking about a dissolution of the whole SAU? No. We're just talking about Danbury, right?
Clarify SAU.
All right, are we talking about the dissolution of the district? We're just talking about the town of Danbury.
Yeah, to make the point literally clear, this request came about from the town of Danbury, who used to be its own school district.
I got that.
Within this SAU.
I got that part.
Okay.
But that still doesn't answer my question. There's no opportunity for other towns to be studied by this committee with a recommendation. It is only Danbury that they're going to talk about.
Well, the other opportunity exists, but
It does?
Yes, it
No,
has.
that's a different question.
Well, hold on. The other opportunity exists for other towns to do the very same thing, but
At a later date.
Yeah, at a later date, I got that.
not by this committee. This committee is
This
being
committee-
formed to address Danbury's
Right.
formal
Right, got
warrant
it.
article,
Thank you.
just to be precise. Hank?
I think that the point that Jeff was making, it would actually be covered in 195.30, which you haven't got to yet. Is the specific information about
Can you
what
point
happens
to the
after
language?
vote. Yeah, it's
Page 12 and 13.
page 12. Basically, the vote to withdraw takes effect on July 1st of the calendar year subsequent. And briefly, it says, after the passage of the withdrawal vote and issue of the certificate of withdrawal, a special meeting of the voters in the withdrawing district shall be held at a time set by the State Board of Education. The warrant for this meeting, approved by the State Board and signed by the Commissioner, shall provide for the election of officers in the withdrawing district, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, that's where the work would be done to establish the district itself at that point. There is provision, we just haven't got there yet.
I just wonder if that would allow Danbury to change his mind at that point.
That's another question.
We have another question from Janet in the back.
Janet Cody, Bristol. I think the question that you're asking about for them to change their mind and withdrawal, the only piece that covers that is their minority report piece that they could submit to the Department of Education, so that they could, in effect, change whatever it happens by a minority report.
And that, again, I don't want to speak for the State Board of Education, but, you know, if the train got moving, and the scenario I described that happened a few years ago where in a different district, the train got moving and the town that initiated the process wanted to put the brakes on, but the train was going a little too fast, that with that minority report may be persuasive enough for the Department of Education to not grant certificate of the withdrawal moving forward.
Okay, but again, Jeff's point was an after-the-fact scenario.
Right.
So,
Right, yeah, there's no delaying. I mean, if the study committee recommends withdrawal, and that goes to the State Board of Education, and they grant the withdrawal moving forward to get it on the ballot, to get it on your warrant, that needs to go on the warrant you either need to call a special meeting, or it needs to go on at the latest, your next annual meeting.
okay, I'd like to call on Lou. You had your hand up as well.
Lou Dieto, Groton. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the sentence in the statute that deals with a minority report seems to apply only if the committee suggests that withdrawal is not feasible.
That's possible as well, too.
So if they said, yeah, withdrawal's okay.
Right. I don't,
The statute doesn't provide for that.
right, the statute, yeah, could you point to that page?
It's on page 2.
Yeah,
Right
that's,
Right in the middle of the paragraph,
Right.
the committee shall submit.
right. The committee shall submit to the State Board of Education either a report that withdrawal is not feasible or suitable, or a report that includes a withdrawal plan. If the committee determines that withdrawal is not feasible or suitable, the town which voted to undertake this study may submit a minority report. For those that may not have heard, the implication is that the minority report can only relate to a desire to withdraw when the committee recommends not withdrawing.
That said, if any town wanted to, if the selectmen wanted to undertake its own study to issue a minority report to the Department of Education, I don't think they're necessarily prohibited from doing that. And what weight the Department of Education would give that is based on the will of the State Board of Education. Fair enough. I mean, is that?
Okay, we could continue.
Sure. I think we were on page 7. I think we touched just about all the aspects there on capital costs. Page 8, disposition of property, and this obviously needs to be sort of researched in line with Ruby's comments. If a pre-existing school district withdraws from the cooperative school district, the cooperative school district shall transfer and convey title to any school building and land located in the withdrawing district to the withdrawing district upon payment by the withdrawing district of the cost of capital improvement and additions to said school buildings. The one question that I had for myself, and again, this is something I'm not clear on, notwithstanding Ruby's comments, where it says the title shall convey upon payment by the withdrawing district. But we also talked about earlier that the payment may be scheduled out over a number of years. So does title convey upon the first payment at a time agreed upon by the two boards, or upon the last payment when all the debt is paid off? I don't know. I know when I've purchased an automobile, they haven't given me the title to the car until I made that last payment. So, but presumably that would be something that would be discussed or formulated either by the withdraw committee in the plan, or perhaps by agreement of the two parties. I think that's about it for 195.28. I think that's pretty clear. One point on page 9, though, bullet point number 4. The withdrawing school district forfeits any equity in all other cooperative school district facilities. So there's no equity. This is obviously, I'm guessing this is a newer building. You'd forfeit any equity that you may have had or that you may have paid into this building when it was bonded however many years ago. Page 10, the vote on withdrawal. I'm going to jump to page 11. I'm not going to read through that statute and just sort of do a breakdown and analysis of RSA 195.29. I think we talked about some of these a little bit earlier. Bullet point number 3. Well, I'll start at the beginning. Bullet point number 1. If the state board approves the withdrawal plan, the cooperative school board shall publish the plan in a newspaper generally circulated within the cooperative school district. Upon written notice of the state board's approval of the withdrawal agreement, the cooperative school board shall file the withdrawal plan with the clerk of the cooperative school district. Number 3, the clerk shall submit the plan to the voters of the district as soon as may be reasonable practical. That's the language that we were talking about earlier. At an annual or special meeting called for the purpose of voting on the plan. And again, remember, the voters of the district, this goes to the vote of the co-op wide, not to the vote of the individual town. 4, the voting shall be by ballot with use of the checklist after reasonable opportunity for debate in open meeting. That language, after reasonable opportunity for debate in open meeting, I think is just a fancy way of saying it would be an article and you need to discuss it at your deliberative session or your annual meeting. The warrant article shall be written as it is in the statute. If you jump back to page 10 real briefly, right in the middle of the page, the statute prescribes the language that the article needs to have, dictated by statute. 6, if a majority of the voters vote in the affirmative, the clerk shall send to the State Board of Education a certified copy of the warrant, certificate of posting, evidence of publication, and minutes of the meeting. 7, if the State Board of Education finds that a majority of the voters voted in favor of the withdrawal plan, it shall issue a certificate, and such certificate shall be conclusive evidence of the withdrawal of the pre-existing district and the continuation of the cooperative school district as of the date of its issuance. 8, if a majority of voters reject the plan, the withdrawing district shall have the right to appeal such vote to the State Board of Education. So that's another consideration. If the withdrawal committee, again, playing this out hypothetically, does recommend withdraw, the State Board of Education grants that, but yet the voters come back and reject that, the withdrawing district has the right to appeal the vote to the State Board of Education. And then number 9 says, if an appeal is filed, the State Board shall investigate and report back to the district on its findings and recommendations. To my knowledge, that's never been initiated. I don't know what the Department of Education would do with any sort of investigation or report. I've never heard of that happening. It's possible it may have at some point. Short of any allegations of like voter fraud, which wouldn't be investigated by the Department of Education anyway. I don't know what they would investigate, so.
Failure to follow due process.
Pardon me?
Failure to follow due
Right,
process.
yeah, right, exactly. They would check to make sure that the posting was proper, the postings, were within X number of days as required by statute and things of that nature. I'm sure it would likely be more procedural than anything else. Time of withdrawal, we discussed this. Assuming everything played out, again, just for the sake of the argument, let's say the 180 days started ticking today or even May 1st. That would get us through the fall to submit the plan. Assuming that recommendation withdrawal was recommended to the State Department of Education by the fall, in line to get it back on the warrant for your February deliberative session vote that passed. We'd be looking at July 1, 2015. If the committee recommends that withdrawal is not feasible, that sort of is the end of the process, essentially. That's the end of my materials. I hope I was clear. I hope I answered some of your questions. I hope that it gave the board and the public alike some good considerations, and happy to answer whatever questions may be remaining.
Thank you very much, Barrett. At this point, I would like to ask if there are any questions from the board for Barrett, and then I would like to open that up to other members of the select boards that are present as our guests this evening, and from there to anyone in the general public that also might be in attendance. Are there any other questions or points to be made from the board? Sue?
It's been brought up about the kindergarten addition. We have a kindergarten room added onto some of our buildings in the district.
Okay.
I think that was done with some kind of federal funding. Maybe it was state funding. But would that count as a capital improvement that the town of Danbury would have to pay back if it was not paid for by the district? Do you have any idea?
I'm guessing not. It's not debt, right?
Right,
It's
right.
not existing debt.
Right.
If there was such an addition to the school in Danbury, that would need to be considered because it may have, again, hypothetically and presumably, increased the value of the building. An assessment of the value of the building would need to be undertaken. And if there were physical additional structures added on to other buildings within the co-op, the withdrawing town or the withdrawing district would lose any equity that may have been gained by the physical structure being added to these other schools. But if there's no existing debt associated with the construction of these kindergarten rooms, there's no bond existing, there's no building aid that's being considered or being paid to the district, my inclination is that it would not become a factor in any debt that the withdrawing district may owe the co-op.
Good question, Sue. Yes.
Neil Irvin, New Hampton. A follow-up to your response. If it was a federal or state grant where the district had to come up with matching funds, say 95% federal funds, 5% from the district, would Danbury then have to repay the matching fund portion?
It's a good question. Let me jump to Jump to page 6. Liability withdrawing district. This is the middle of that paragraph. The line on the left begins determined by the State Board of Education, and then a comma. This is the part that may address your question. Except that the withdrawing district shall not be liable for any indebtedness or loss of state aid or other aid contracted after the district has duly notified the remaining district in the cooperative that a withdrawal study is being requested. That seems to only address to, I'm reading this for my own, so I can understand it as well. That seems to mean and loss only in state aid, meaning the cooperative school district couldn't get from the withdrawing district adequacy aid that is paid by the state because they'd lose adequacy money, presumably, for the kids in that town that are no longer members of the. I say this, and I don't mean this to be patronizing. I'm getting a couple quizzical looks. The state pays to each school district $3,450 per head in adequacy aid. That's what the state gives the cooperative school district. If Danbury has, I'm making a number up, 100 kids, those 100 kids come off the rolls for the cooperative school district, so you're going to lose the cooperative school district would lose at the very least 100 kids times $3,450 per head in your adequacy grant from the state. The cooperative school district does not have a claim for that state aid. That's what that provision means from the withdrawing district. And then the second part, or other aid contracted after the district is duly notified. That's what we talked about if, say, next year you took out a bond for $200,000. You've been on notice, they may not be around, they don't have to pay for it. Interesting question about whether or not they would be obligated for some sort of matching funds on some sort of federal grant. I think
For a project that has already been.
that has already been initiated,
This
right?
speaks to the teacher.
Right. You might have a good claim for it. You might have a good claim for it. I don't want to give a firm answer. That's something I can, if you wanted to jot that down, I could throw that by so the colleagues I'm going to talk to on Wednesday. It's an interesting question and something that should be considered.
Anyone else have any questions?
Well, who's responsible for this plan of education for all the students in the withdrawal district? I think it's pretty easy to figure out what the cost of this is sooner or later. You've got some pretty smart talent in the district to figure that out. So you can figure the cost, and it might very well be that there's no cost in the other towns. In fact, it might save money, or it may cost, one way or other, you can figure that out. But at the same token, when you're going through this process, if they don't, if in this case the town of Danbury doesn't come up and say, we want to reconsider this and vote to stop it, then who's responsible for putting together the educational plan? Because assuming that they're willing to take up the cost of let's assume this. A, it doesn't require any impact to the other towns. Okay? So between teachers and all the rest of the stuff that goes away with it. Why is the school district then turning around and developing an education plan for the ones that want to withdraw?
Right. There's a provision. I'm trying to find it.
I mean, shouldn't they get their
Right.
legal team and others up to speed
Right.
to, on their nickel, to turn around and do that kind of thing?
No, there's a provision that calls for, I'd have to dig through and look for it, but there's a provision in the packet that calls for when the vote, okay, 2 steps. I'm gonna step back for a second. The withdrawal plan, as you're talking about on page 4, a plan for the education of all students of the withdrawing district, right? That means that the withdrawal plan at least needs to consider what school these children are going to attend. It needs to consider the possibility of, say, tuition contracts or possibility of an area agreement. It doesn't need to be specific in the sense that says, Danbury will have a agreement with the cooperative school district. I don't think you need to get in that level of specificity. It needs to call for possibilities, contingencies, what is the plan for, in the broadest sense, the education of the children that may not be covered by the cooperative school district. Because we know that Danbury has an elementary school, right? We're going to assume that the children are going to continue to attend that elementary school. The plan is going to need to consider, at the very least, where will these children in grades 4 through 12 go? It doesn't mean you need signed contracts. However, if you look through here, and this is, I'm not exactly sure where it is in the statute, there's a provision.
195-26, section 6.
Right, that's the plan for the continuation. Shall detail
What page?
proposed assignments of students in grades by the cooperative district, including if any tuition agreements or contracts proposed. If the withdrawal study does go through and it's passed by the voters, DOE signs off on it, there's a provision in here without digging through and looking for it. It says after that vote is established, the Department of Education can appoint school board members for the new existing district. We have the power and authority of existing regular school boards to sign contracts, to negotiate contracts. So after the vote goes through, assuming the vote to withdraw goes through and it's passed, school board members are established in the withdrawing town. They're almost pro tem isn't even right. Go ahead.
It's
Well,
section
let's see if I
30.
understand this. The money part is gonna be a big chunk of this. It's just the way nature is. The second part of this is, the Department of Education, I would think, would be a little bit unlikely to turn around and allow this to go forward and say, well, we got this broad idea that they're gonna get educated someplace.
Right.
Why is the school, if the committee turns around and comes up with a recommendation and so on, then isn't it on the withdrawing schools' nickel and effort to put together what their idea of their education plan is, to be included as that report, rather than the committee turning around and doing it for them? They're the ones who are asking to withdraw. They're the ones who are supposed to come up with an education plan, I would think.
It doesn't say that here, though.
One, you're not bound by, the district, the withdrawing district would not necessarily be bound by whatever proposals would be put in the withdrawal plan, because it's just a plan. A plan sometimes change, right? The Department of Education could grant that. I would also recommend too that the board then, if this is and it's a legitimate concern, if you want more detail on this, I'd ask the board to contact a district that's recently gone through a withdrawal and see what their plan said and how they prepared for this and whether or not they, go on.
Well, you could go through all this, and then immediately it's gonna, because there's not enough detail to say how those children in the withdrawing district is gonna be educated, and you can vote for this until the cows come home, they could turn around and turn it down.
Yeah.
And so the vote of the town, in fact, my guess is it's also the opposite way, instead of being held hostage. But the thing is, the reality is that someone has to pony up the effort and cost associated with putting together an educational plan for whether it's a new district, or how they plan to handle K through 5, K through 6, K through 8, and then 9 through 12.
Yeah.
That's gonna be detailed enough, and it would seem to me that that should not be on the burden of the taxpayers in the other towns. That ought to be part of the obligation of the withdrawing district.
That's not what the RSA says.
Oh, it's charting territory.
Sue?
Yeah, I take it as a plan for the education of the students, not being your education plan that lists your curriculum and what books you're going to use and all those fine things. And it seems like it would be a good idea for Danbury to have that to go along with the broader recommendation of the committee if they were to recommend withdrawal. But to me, a plan for the education means, okay, how are you going to do this? Where are your kids going to go? Are they going to be K to 4, K to 5, or whatever? And then where are your students going to go after that? Are they going to come to Newfoundland? Are they going to go someplace else? a really broad type of thing, I would think. The individual education plan, I mean, not individual education plan, but the education plan that goes into detail seems like it should be set by that newly formed board that
And it would
that they
be.
would get.
The
That would
other
be the
thing, too,
detail.
The withdrawal plans that have been submitted to the Department of Education are public records. I mean, they may be in a file somewhere, but they should be accessible.
Yeah.
They're very simple.
Yeah.
I think it's Sullivan that says they will maintain a file cabinet in the town
Well,
clerk's office.
Sullivan's a little bit of a different situation,
because
because they don't have any schools.
Well, they have a school, but they're not
They don't
using it
use
for
it.
education. So
Right.
their plan says our kids will go here, 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 and we'll keep a
Right.
file cabinet in the town hall.
You can also,
That's their plan.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, they had contracts.
Okay, Lou?
I'm having such a good time listening to this debate. Of course, that affects the students who are from Danbury today, but are 6th or 9th or 12th graders. So they have to know where to go tomorrow. But I want to come back to the point raised earlier and ask the question. Suppose a grant proposal was made by the district in years past. The district paid X percent and was matched by a percentage from the granting agency, and that burden has been paid off. So it could be the or it could be the kindergarten classrooms, whatever it is. It's now completely free of any debt. The district is no longer responsible for that. Explain to me, is it still under consideration that 5 or 10% that the district had to pony up to get the grant, is that still a component of the liability of the leaving district?
I'm inclined to say no.
That's
The
fine.
liability of the leaving district is related to capital costs and capital debt.
Okay.
And
And ongoing debt? Current debt or any debt?
Outstanding.
current debt,
Okay.
current debt.
That's what I thought.
And the withdrawing district forfeits, the flip side of that, the withdrawing district forfeits any equity that it has.
Without getting into opposing points of view on that, I think what we have, where we have arrived is that this is a complex matter, that we have elaborated on it formally in a public forum to allow everyone who may participate on the committee to hear about its complexities and issues and challenges. And if we take the next step, what's likely to happen is that the board, based on an action item later on this evening, may decide to form a committee, to go forward, form the committee, and then invite the other attendees from each of the respective boards. We're not going to solve the problem this evening. We're not going to address any of the other issues this evening, but I would like to keep it germane to questions that may still be on your mind before we close the discussion on this, and be certain that we've heard from everyone who may have a concern in this forum. That would include Mr. Rossner, if he has any to share with us relative to the process and the procedure, and also Dr. McCormick. So with that said, my inclination is to suggest that we will need to take this forward legally in the manner prescribed and get some answers along the way. And part of the along the way part will involve retaining our district's counsel at substantial expense, in my guess, to find out some of the answers to proceeding at some point. It's my personal preference that if we choose to do this, that we hold a committee meeting initially and get some of these issues on the table and see where the committee that has to be formed by the RSA decides where to go with that. And we certainly appreciate any assistance that the School Board Association can give us without charging us, as they don't do. And we like to start down that road anyway each time. Very much appreciate Barrett's participation here and willingness to answer the many, many questions that I've had for him this year. So thank you very much publicly.
My pleasure.
Are there other questions that we have from anyone in the public? Janet?
Janet Cody, Bristol. My only question is in regards to what do you see as a timetable for this committee formation right now?
Well, depending on what the board does this evening with respect to that question, which I believe is going to be to have to form the committee and then send out letters to the respective select boards to invite you to assign a member, promulgate the convening of the committee, and then going from there. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I respectfully disagree with Barrett regarding the formation of the committee starting on March 12th, Election Day. But then again, Mom didn't let me go to law school, so I defer to Barrett's opinion on that, and we'll see where that goes. That's probably one of the first questions that our district's attorney will end up answering if we don't get an answer by consensus on Wednesday, which I appreciate. Lou?
If I remember correctly, the warrant put forth words "at no expense to the district." Is that correct?
I believe that's referring to the town, but let me read it. Within 180 days after the date of the formation, the committee shall report its findings to the State Board of Education. There is no cost for this study. It's a warrant article.
That's the point I'm making. So who pays the attorney's bill?
Well, hold on. This is the warrant for a voter in the town of Danbury to consider. And the implication I derive from that, and you as a moderator, I think would readily agree with me on this.
Probably not, but go ahead.
The warrant article tells the voter in its concluding sentence that there is no cost for this study.
To the town.
And it's referring to a yes or no vote to declare that we mandate that the school board undertake the study.
It's not a money article for the town.
I'm not arguing that, although I think that's poor wording, but
I don't disagree.
But the real question, though, is
Who's going to pay for the study?
this study will cost money to the district. Is that part of the burden that is considered if and when a decision by the committee is that a breakup is okay? This is an unanticipated expense. It might not even be trivial.
And
I don't necessarily want an immediate answer, but I think it's a legitimate point.
And it's legitimate because it's also not budgeted.
That's right.
So your point is well taken, and it's an issue of substance that I believe the committee, once it's formed, needs to consider in order to come to its conclusion, whatever that conclusion may be. Neil?
Yeah, Neil Irvin, New Hampton. Just a procedural, going back to Ms. Hill's statement earlier that Danbury may want to reconsider its position once you've done a title deed search. If the committee hypothetically was to come back with the recommendation not to pursue Danbury's withdrawal, and Danbury chose to be in support of that finding, they're not obligated to file a minority report, are they? No. So the report going in, it's not, would put an end to it?
Perhaps. With respect to the legal costs that will be involved, I think the committee will end up making a recommendation, and now we're getting into splitting hairs, but how does the committee actually mandate or get access to school board funds by virtue of not being in charge or responsible as a fiduciary to the school district? The statute notwithstanding.
They don't have any, the committee could not direct the school board to contact its attorney to receive a legal opinion. You know, I think at the end of the day, that decision would ultimately be left up to the school board. You know, there's certainly no statutory authority for the withdrawal committee to direct the school board to hire an attorney, consult with an attorney. You know, Mr. Paul, so much of this is often legal, so much of it is off, and political and personal, so that's something that the school board would need to consider.
That technically would have to be taken up at a separate school board meeting
Yeah, I think it
in
probably,
order to
right.
expend the funds.
I think it probably would have to, so.
You know, you raised yet another issue along those lines.
Yeah, but it doesn't-
But you could not consider it at this meeting
But it
be illegal.
doesn't.
Right. So there is some cost involved, not the least of which would be taking time away from the school board to focus on other matters of interest as well. But be that as it may, the vote's been taken, it's passed, and we need to address it. So it's likely to occur as an action item later on this evening, which, by the way, just for the record, I have a letter.
I think that I would need legal advice on that, actually, because I think this compels me to be part of
It doesn't mean you have to participate. You could abstain.
it. Yeah. I think we should get advice.
You want your letter back?
Yes.
Okay. For the record, I
Takes
have
care of
not
that.
received a letter. Were you able to find that item you're looking for?
No, I was looking to see if there was anything about expending money. I think there's something in the, again, don't quote me, I think there's something within the SAU withdrawal statute that says that the school district shall expend money if there's an SAU withdrawal study, but there's nothing in the co-op statute.
Mr. Rossner?
Like yourself, I didn't go to law school. But it seems to me that with the wording of the article saying that the school board has been directed to undertake this study, whatever the committee makes up, the fact is, the school board's been directed, the study committee is being formed by the school board. So any bills incurred by the committee would be the responsibility of the school board. That's what the warrant article says. Direct the
school board to
district
conduct a study.
Undertake a study. So you're undertaking a study. You may do it through a committee. that
You have,
includes-
right, you have to do it through a committee, but ultimately,
It's your study.
it's the school board's study.
So the bills incurred in the completion of the study are your bills.
The same way your facilities committee couldn't direct the school board to spend money on an attorney or call an attorney, or, I think that's a good reading.
That's why we like you, Mr. Rossner.
Glad there's some reason.
Yes, Hank?
If in establishing the committee, but later tonight or whenever, perhaps part of that could be an authorization to spend money?
It's not bloody likely.
I don't know.
What do you do with any other committee?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like any other subcommittee.
It's any other-
Essentially.
Yeah.
They can't spend the next.
You just run it the same way.
They'd have to request funds.
Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly most likely establish it legally, but that's taken up under action items later on the agenda. Are there other comments, any other issues of concern? I certainly wanted to thank everyone for attending this evening, and I probably should have welcomed everyone for being here in the very beginning.
If I could just make one closing remark, Vincent Paul.
Yes.
You have the handout that I provided. Please note my name and email and phone number is on that. I just want to let the public know that as a matter of practice at the School Boards Association, we don't answer calls or inquiries from members of the general public. We're not a state agency, we're a nonprofit organization. So we're responsive to our members' needs, which is the school board, obviously. That said, if you have questions or comments or concerns, please direct them to the school board, direct them to Vincent Paul or Superintendent McCormick, and they can get in touch with me then. But I ask that I not be contacted privately about any of the information. Sir?
You didn't have nearly enough copies for this group. I wonder if you could email it out to us.
Yeah, I can get you an electronic copy, absolutely.
Neil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While you have so many representatives of boards here, and the Board of Selectmen are going to have to come up with a volunteer to serve on your committee, Do you anticipate what your meeting schedule would look like, once a month, twice a month? Do you know what day you might be considering? Before people, I see people standing in and getting ready to leave, and that'd be useful information
Yeah,
for us when we go back to deliberate amongst ourselves.
My thought on that is that we will form the committee as the next step, and then invite members of the select boards to assign their member, and then call a meeting date. And the committee will decide what it wants to do based on the tuition expense that was paid this evening for the education given to us by Mr. Christina. And we will decide as a committee what we want to do as a committee. The first item of which will be, for example, to organize ourselves and perhaps elect a spokesperson, and then to decide what a quorum is, as I mentioned earlier. I've already researched that issue. Things of that nature. And then whatever comes up for business, I think there are some points that we already have done some homework on, not the least of which Ruby has some data to share with the committee. Mr. Rossner has some capital cost information to share with the committee. And given that specific data, the first topical discussion will then lead us down the road toward what we will have to do, when we will need to meet next, and so on. Given the 180-day proviso, we will hopefully know something by Wednesday or so on when that actually starts, or when we believe it should start. I do have a predisposition on this topic. I won't share it publicly at this point, but at the committee meeting, I will certainly offer some thoughts on that. I'm very inclined to offer my opinion.
That's not like you.
I think the whole world's entitled to my opinion, so. Any other comments? Okay, thank you all for coming. For those of you who are here and would like to stay, you're certainly welcome to do so. Thank you, Barrett. We
Thank you
very
to
much
the board for
appreciate
having
you.
me up. Thank you.
Very informative.
Dan?
Take advantage.
I figured you were smart enough to say
Ruby, are we in official pause here?
He said it, but nobody could hear. Yeah.
So, with the exception of Don Franklin, who is not here this evening, basically everyone indicated they would like to assume the existing roles in terms of committee assignment. I don't believe there were any exceptions. The committees form their own organization when they meet, and the simplest thing for us to do would be to consider the detail here, to just go through this and decide whether there are any changes, just to confirm it or not. The committees and the representatives are probably the most important choices to make this evening. The councils are necessary once the superintendent forms those organizations and uses those tools to his or her advantage in this case. So the first committee that's listed is the Contract Negotiations Committee, which there's no need to form because we don't have a formal request from the Newfound Area Teachers Association to negotiate an agreement as yet. At that point in time, should they ask us to do that, we will then be able to form a committee. Just FYI, the reason that was formed last year is it was the intent of the board to ask for the Teachers Association to negotiate with us. So we can skip that. The Football Field Oversight Committee has consisted of, in the past, of myself and Paul Reinhardt from last year. That's currently what we are proposing that we would do this evening. The School Board Policy Committee consisted last year of Ruby Hill, Sue Cheney, and Don Franklin. Mr. Franklin indicated that he would be willing to swap that out in favor of Jeff, if Jeff were interested in participating on the policy committee, FYI. So we want to address that and make that decision. The Data Task Force has consisted of myself and Don Franklin last year. No change to that. The School Board Association delegate, I have been for the past several years. I would suggest that I would continue in that role unless somebody else wants to supplant me. Paul Reinhardt has graciously decided to take up the responsibility of attending twice as many meetings by coming to the board meetings and then also to the school budget committee meetings as well, so no change there. We had our prior member serve as the legislative representative. I believe Jeff had indicated he would serve in the capacities that we would identify and suggest to him. You're certainly welcome to make your input known at this point. What will happen in terms of action items, thanks to a change to policy, is that we will vote on this structure to approve it as a board, not just by assignment by the chair, which is what used to happen. And then the councils are listed accordingly. The Community Relations Council had myself and the prior member from Groton. The Curriculum Instruction and Assessment had Sue Cheney last year. Professional Development had Ruby Hill. Technology was Don Franklin. Don again suggested that that's something Jeff might be interested in participating in. He agreed to swap out. And for the Wellness Council, the prior Groton representative. So, with that said, is there further discussion? Any inputs?
I'm open to whatever.
Okay.
I'm here to serve.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on Jeff participating in policy, ladies?
Only that I told Don I didn't want to chair it, so that's probably why he's asking you to take his place. Because I suggested he might like to.
I don't have a problem with that. I'll take my lumps.
We elect the chair at the first meeting, but yeah, I did ask that someone else do it.
Okay. Would you like to take Don up on his offer to serve on policy? That is a major thing that we do as a responsibility of the school board. We are a policy-making board.
Yeah, I think I can do that.
Okay, so let's put Jeff in for School Board Policy Committee, having been forewarned of the possibility. Maybe there's a baptism of fire in the works. The other role that you might assume as well is the legislative representative.
That one scares me a little bit, but I'm willing to stand up.
Okay. So we'll leave that in for you as well.
Do you think Don might like that one?
He did not mention it, no.
What was he going to swap out for, do you know?
Just whatever might be left. Of course, we could assign him to the Wellness Council, or any of the other councils as well. He would be part of the Data Task Force and the Technology Council right now, unless Jeff wants to play ball there.
Well,
There is a meeting coming up the last week of April.
Yeah, I think that, I would be remiss if I didn't get involved in the Technology Council.
Okay. So we'll put Jeff on the Technology Council, Legislative Representative, and School Board Policy Committee, which means Dawn could probably continue to chair the Data Task Force, and we will put Dawn on the Wellness Council. Swapping out the prior year's Groton rep. Any other changes of interest?
I'd like to do community relations.
Community Relations Council as well. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, that was actually a yes for that, so glad you're there as well. You're gonna be one busy little fella.
Things are slow at the shop.
Thanks for stepping up. Okay, football field oversight, data task force, school. Okay. Any further discussion on item 6B?
What did we decide on the facilities and finance?
We decided that we did not form anything last week. And we tabled finance. Any further discussion on committee assignments? Okay. One other matter regarding this topic. Policy BBF, which I'm going to pass around to you, if you could take a quick look at this. I learn something every day. There's so much to learn. It's amazing how challenging it is to keep up with things, but nonetheless, we try. Policy BBF reads as follows. The school board will adopt a member code of ethics statement, see BBF-E, what this is. When each board member is sworn into office, the member will read, review, and sign a copy of the statement, which indicates agreement with the statement. If you could each take a copy. And I don't ever recall being presented with this document for acquisition of my signature.
And there is no place to sign.
The other little oversight, as Ruby just noted, is there's no signature line on it, but be that as it may, there's certainly plenty of room on page 2. Unless anyone has an objection to complying with this,
I do.
I would like to ask that everyone consider signing it and submitting it to the superintendent. Lloyd, do you have a point?
I would recommend, before I would sign it, that we add another paragraph.
And that paragraph would be to
And
change the
I'll read it.
policy on BBF or BBF?
BBF.
On BBF. What would that paragraph be?
And swear to follow the school board policy as stated and voted by the board, fairly and consistently, without bias or prejudice, in all decisions put forth by the board.
That has to go to policy.
Okay, well,
That's when I
then
say I want to put that, then we will sign this when we get it voted in or whatever.
you can certainly suggest that to the next policy committee meeting, but it would need to go through for consideration by the committee and
Yeah,
decision on it. So,
Right. That's
Jeff?
right.
I'd like to submit that that's part of the oath when you're sworn into the office.
You mean that the fact is that you'd be expected to
You're-
conform to policy, and this is the policy?
The policy says that at the time you swear into office, you also read and sign this form. When you swear into office, you actually make that statement.
Where is it in the policy?
It's right here, BBF.
BBF.
That policy I just read is in there?
It's right there.
It says
It's in
when
front of you.
each board
Yeah.
member is sworn into office.
Yeah.
Okay? When you swear into office, you swear this. Then
this
it
isn't
also
in here.
requires that you sign this page. This is in the oath of office that they're talking about
No,
signing.
this should be into the part of the ethics, this paragraph.
But then it will duplicate your oath of office.
Well, it doesn't say in there, you, as a board member, you will vote by, your policy is stated and voted by the board fairly and consistently without prejudice or bias.
No, that's your recommended change to
Right.
the policy.
Right.
That doesn't occur at this meeting, that's going to occur at a policy committee meeting for consideration by the policy committee.
Right.
And at that point in time, if it passes and it satisfies you, you can sign off on it or not. I think at this juncture, this is one of these things that, as we go along and uncover what we need to do, we need to address some of these things. This is a simple thing to address. For those of us that want to sign it and execute it, I would ask that you do so as soon as you can, and please get a copy to the superintendent. I am going to sign the school board member ethics policy this evening myself, and I'm going to pass it over to Superintendent McCormick. For those of you who want to do so as well, I encourage you to do so. This has been an oversight that we need to just deal with. Thank you. For those of you who do not want to, it's entirely up to you to make that choice. And you can decide to do so at another date. I just think that the information should be on record according to our own policy that says we will follow our own policy.
That is the problem.
So, no further discussion on item 6B, or is there? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 6C, personnel resignations. Dr. McCormick.
Yes, in your packet, there were 2 letters of resignation. I would recommend that the board accept both as they have been submitted in a timely fashion.
Any further discussion on the letters of resignation received in non-public? Hearing none.
Mr. Migliore, that's at the end of this school year, as was noted.
Yes, that's
Yep.
correct. I'm sorry. That will occur at the end of the current school year. Okay. Is there objection to accepting the resignations on the consent calendar? Hearing none, we will put that on the consent calendar for action. Okay, we're now at item 6D, election of professional staff. Dr. McCormick.
I would ask that the board elect staff as nominated by the superintendent of schools, and was included in your packet also.
Is there further discussion regarding nomination of professional staff only, as nominated by Superintendent McCormick? Hearing none, I would ask that we put that on the consent agenda. Is there any objection to doing so? Hearing none, we will add it to the consent agenda. Sorry, I called that calendar last time. I meant to say agenda. Okay, we're now at item 6E, tuition rate policy, JECB. It is in your packet. And just to review that, we're doing things a little bit out of sequence this evening because we wanted to handle the Danbury request expeditiously right at the beginning. So this policy reads that high school tuition as submitted by our business administrator on this memo will be set for $17,725 per student. The middle school tuition, $17,247 per student, and the elementary school, $15,460 per student. Said numbers being equal to the Fund 10 budget by level per student for the appropriation recently approved by the voters of the Newfound Area School District. Is there discussion? Sue?
Well, I noticed that the elementary school figure went down from last year, which was down from the year before, but the middle school figure went up a few thousand. Is there some,
Mostly about enrollment. You notice if you look at enrollment, middle school enrollment is down this year because we had a bubble going through that's now in 9th grade.
Yes, FYI, the enrollment continues its downward trend this month. We're now down to 1,254 students. which is down from 1309 in October, which is 55 students fewer. Is there further discussion on the tuition rates setting? Hearing none, I would opt to put that on the consent agenda. Is there any objection to that? Hearing none, it's now on the consent agenda. Okay, baseline sped trend information. First, quarterly report, meaning this is the first time we have done this report. This is the result of the SPED study that we did, in which Dr. Oputa made a recommendation at the request of some of us to somehow begin tracking data in SPED. And you have it in front of you this evening as prepared by Dan Boston, right? This report will become part of quarterly by calendar information for the first meeting in the month following the end of the calendar quarter. And it records information as follows. Ratio of special education students to special education teachers, special ed students K through 12, FTE special ed teachers K through 12. The next category has ratio of special ed students to paraprofessionals. Again, special ed students to special ed paraprofessionals. And then in the third category, ratio of special ed students to case managers, special ed students K through 12 to FTE case managers. That's full-time equivalent case managers. And then the fourth category is ratio of paraprofessionals to special education teachers. Special ed paraprofessionals, and then special education teachers and case managers. And then finally, there's a fifth category, which is total out-of-district placements by quarter. So the first quarter showed, for example, 14, and that was out-of-district placements made by NASD. There were 12, and then court-ordered out-of-district placements, there were 2, for a total of 14. Now, the one thing that's not on here that I probably might want to add, my preference, again, this is new, so we're going to go along with what we started with originally, but we may want to consider the total special ed students divided by the current number of students to give us the percentage of special education students, which was a detailed piece of information that was in Dr. Oputa's report, which I calculate to be 186 divided by 1254 gives us 14.8%.
That's down from originally, at least the data task force.
Yeah,
Yep.
it is down slightly. So, without objection, I'd like to ask Dan, if you could, to add that column, probably at the end. It was the gross manner in which we had been tracking data before implementation of this report.
I have a question. Is there a reason why it's calendar year versus school year?
Yeah, that was just a choice that I had made by recommendation to Dan. My feeling was that we would, if we stayed with quarterly, we would do it in April, which is after the first quarter, of course, and then after the end of the school year, we would do it again in July. And then we'd see in October the impact of the first month's enrollment. And then again in January, we'd see what happened after the first essentially full quarter of the year in school.
We also have the October 1 numbers for the state.
So it's just an arbitrary calendar choice.
Because we could do the same months, but for the school.
Phil?
Did Dr. Oputa recommend quarterly? How do we arrive at a quarterly report?
I think we discussed it, and part of the discussion was that we would begin trend tracking not more frequently than quarterly. But it was a major component of the study. We wanted some way to continue to track.
No, I understand the tracking piece, I understand that, but I just wondered about the quarterly as opposed to, mid-year, for example.
Well, it's been such an important focus of this school board for the past several years. I thought we'd want to get a handle on it and just stay on top of it. So, it's just incremental data. Sue?
And I really, thank you, Dan, for doing this for us. It's very easy to read. It's very good. Thanks.
Just if I could give maybe a point of note on the methodology, might be helpful. Specifically, there are 2 points of the methodology I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page, so you understood that it was this was a first effort. In terms of FTE for special education teachers versus special education case managers, I spoke with each principal about the responsibilities being handled by the various people in their staff that would fit into one of these two categories. If an individual spent 100% of the time in one function or the other, they were 1.0 FTE in that category. If any individual, and there were a number of them, who spent part of their time doing one and part of their time doing the other, meaning instruction versus case management, I didn't try and gauge what portion was in each section. I just decided they'd be half FTE case management, half FTE special education teacher if they did any sort of blend. The second piece to the methodology has to do with the FTE of paraprofessionals. We have paraprofessionals contracted for a wide range of hours per day. If they're contracted for 6 or more hours per day, and it would be up to 7, I have them as a full FTE. If I took the ones who were contracted for less than 6 hours a day and summed their hours divided by 6 to give you an FTE number in that regard.
One thought that occurs to me that would be helpful, I think, if you could memorialize what you just said as part of the definitions in the spreadsheet.
That makes it easier for someone else to do my job, which I'm not inclined to do.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that part. What I would like to do is avoid the question in the future.
No problem, I'll notate it on the sheet. No problem.
That definition would make the report clearer.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the first quarterly SPED report? Thank you, Dan, for preparing that. Hearing none, if we want to go ahead and accept it, we would put that on the consent agenda as well.
Do we have to vote on that?
If there's objection to putting it on the consent agenda to accept it as modified, I would be willing to hear that now.
I just didn't know that it was a voting item.
I just want to accept it formally for the first time.
Okay.
So. So, without objection. Okay, search committee for student services administrator, who will be probably assuming responsibility for this data once that person is hired. Phil, if you wanted to address this, we were going to suggest that a board member be assigned to the search committee.
That is correct. I met with Superintendent-elect Buckley probably 3 weeks ago, and one of the first priority items that I raised relates to the search and recruitment of a special student services administrator. Asked her what her thoughts were on the process she'd like to follow, and one of the things that she identified was to have a search committee comprised of various individuals throughout the system, including a board member representative.
Okay.
You may have noted, well, it has been posted on Ed Jobs, New Hampshire, and in hard copy in the 3 newspapers we usually use.
Okay, thank you. If it please the board, If I could, I would like to suggest that I be assigned for this function. I've had a primary interest in this topic for the past several years that I've been on the board, and I would like to assume the responsibility to assist in the hiring of the SPED coordinator, or in this case, the Special
Student Services Administrator.
Student Services Administrator, right. If there's objection, I would entertain that so we can discuss it, as long as you're prepared to debate the merits of Special Ed Rule 1100 with me. Okay, hearing none, I would suggest that my volunteering for that should be put on the consent agenda. Is there objection to it going on the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none, it will. All right, we're now at item 6H, which is a review of the election results, which I believe is also in the packet. Yes. This was, just to introduce it, I have some comments, and I hope that there will be other comments from other members of the board as well. This was an interesting year. We put forward a number of different articles, and just going in sequence, it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that under individual elections, two of us ran unopposed until about 12 hours before the election began, and at that point I obtained an opponent. And if I did the math, if she stuck around for probably 4 or 5 days, I might be in trouble, because my opponent received 145 votes in less than 12 hours of having announced her candidacy. So kudos to her for standing up for that opportunity, and I certainly advocate anyone who's interested in participating in public service to certainly declare early enough to make an impact. The teacher contract, if I could, I'd just like to go in sequence on these. Under Article 2, I thought we had excellent support and recognition of the advantages of the changes that we made in the teaching contract this past year, and we saw a greater than 60% margin in favor of support of the agreement. While it's only for 1 year, I thought that was excellent. Coincidental with that is Article 3, which was suggested by Dr. McCormick, and it got an equivalent acknowledgement by the voters, in that 63% approved the provision for a special meeting were it to be necessary to renegotiate any aspect of the agreed upon collective bargaining agreement. Item 4, Article 4, I was especially pleased with. It got a 69% approval, which was amazing. This was the limited fund balance retention. The argument was made that this gives us the ability to avoid over-budgeting of contingencies, at least to the extent that we may have done so historically. Let's not forget this in the fall, if we have a fund balance yet again this year, or whatever year we do next. This is a quiver in the, an arrow in the quiver of the school board to continue to manage in fiscally responsibly manner the funds that we budget for. And I think it challenges us to not over-budget in contingencies. Article 5, this is a traditional article, got a little bit less support, a traditional article, but with slightly less support than the fund balance article. And Dan, I had a question for you on this. I presume that we would set aside this money first if we had a fund balance?
You have to.
Okay.
Because this is not optional at this point.
Okay.
Whereas the other one is.
The other was optional, so it would be done in that
Article 4
sequence.
is discretionary on an annualized basis.
Okay, got it.
But this one, once it's voted in, you have to abide by it.
Okay. Article 6 was the tax cap rescission. This not only fell short of the 60% majority required to rescind it, but well short of it, showing a detailed understanding, I think, by informed voters that this is merely a tool that allows a modicum of budgetary control. The problem with its ineffectual legislation notwithstanding. Tuesday, by the way, tomorrow, in Concord, our legislative house will hold a hearing on a permanent fix for SB2, and that puts this issue to bed finally, hopefully. I will be going to that meeting, and I believe Dan's attending, and Fran Wendelbo is planning to attend from the school budget committee. You're all welcome from the board to also attend. It's in the legislative office building on the 3rd floor at 10 a.m. And this law only restricts what the school budget committee can present for a number, but not what the legislative body can in fact do and approve. So it's simply a tool of the voters. And then I have final comments on Article 7, the operating budget. This was another clear indication that the overwhelming majority of voters prefer us to hold the line on spending versus a higher default budget, as was the case this year. Are there other comments on the results of the vote? Anyone?
You covered one of my other